few miles from here, 2 years ago at America Fest 2023, Charlie delivered a speech on stage for our TPUSA Faith event.
Conservative activist Charlie Kirk was fatally shot during a speaking event for his American Comeback Tour at Utah Valley University on Wednesday, September 10th. The 31-year-old right-wing activist was speaking at an open-air event in Orem when he was unalived by an alleged shooter, Tyler Robinson, who allegedly fired from approximately 200 yards away on a student building roof. Following this tragic incident, his wife, Erika Kirk, has broken her silence to address the death of her husband. And what she said became one of the unforgettable speeches in U.S. history.
He quoted one of his favorite Bible verses, Isaiah chapter 6, verse 8. "Here I am, Lord. Send me."
Come along to find out. Erika Kirk delivers emotional tribute to late husband. On September 12th, Erika Kirk stood before the world for the very first time since the loss of her husband, and with a trembling voice and tears that she did not try to hide, she spoke words that carried both heartbreak and strength. In that moment, she was not just a grieving widow. She was a woman determined to make sure her husband's name and his work would live on. She told those listening that the people responsible for her husband's death had no idea what they had really done. It was not just about taking one man's life, she implied. It was about shaking a family, testing a faith, and attempting to silence a movement. And yet, as she spoke through a live stream on Turning Point USA's YouTube channel, one could feel that she was not going to let despair have the final word. Erika reflected on the man she had loved and lost, recalling over and over his devotion to both family and faith. She reminded everyone that Charlie had always believed in God's design for marriage and the family, describing it as one of life's greatest treasures. And wasn't that the truth of who he was? He never treated marriage as just a title or a contract. For him, it was a daily act of love. She remembered how he would ask her, sometimes with complete seriousness and other times with a smile, how he could serve her better. How could he be a better husband? How could he be a better father? It was his way of making sure she always felt cherished. His way of showing that being present and intentional in their relationship mattered more than anything else. To Erika, her husband's life reflected the very words of Scripture he held dear. She repeated the verse he loved most, Ephesians 5, verse 25, about husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church. And then, with a voice heavy with emotion, she affirmed that Charlie had lived those words to the fullest. He had laid down his life for her, for their children, and even for his country. Could there be any greater example of covenantal love, she asked the crowd, than giving everything, every breath, every ounce of strength for those you love? In her eyes, his love was not just a private act, but a living testimony of the faith he carried and the values he stood for. Yet, it wasn't only his public work or faith that she wanted to preserve. Erika also shared personal, tender moments that revealed the private man behind the public figure. She spoke of coming home one night and being met with their daughter's innocent question, "Where's Daddy?" How could a mother find the right words for such a heartbreaking moment? She recounted telling their little girl that her daddy loved her so very much, and that he was away on a work trip with Jesus so that he could provide for her beloved blueberry budget. It was a bittersweet moment, one that revealed the innocence of a child's heart and the heavy burden of a mother trying to shield that innocence with love. She also pointed back to a video she had shared on Instagram, one that showed Charlie tenderly telling their daughter the story of how he and Erika first met. To him, it had all begun as a job interview, but very quickly he realized that he had found something much greater. He had seen her beauty, her intelligence, her elegance, and her Christ-like spirit, and at that point, the idea of a job seemed insignificant compared to the love story that was beginning. He told their daughter in that video that he had abandoned the interview in favor of pursuing the woman who would become his wife. To Erika, that video was not just a memory. It was living proof of the joy and tenderness that had always defined their love. Then came the part of her speech where her grief transformed into something stronger, a declaration, almost like a battle cry. She told everyone listening that those who had caused this loss had no idea what kind of fire they had ignited within her. Could they have known, she asked, that the cries of a widow would echo louder than the voices that tried to silence her husband? She vowed to continue Charlie's mission with every breath she had. She told the audience and viewers across America that the movement her husband had built would not die, and that she would refuse to let it fade into memory. She made a promise that his name would never be forgotten, and her voice carried the weight of a woman who intended to keep that promise no matter what it took. Because the reason she stood there alone, clutching her husband's dream with such unbreakable resolve, was rooted in a moment so sudden, so devastating, that it changed everything in the blink of an eye. And if you think the pain in her voice was powerful, wait until you hear how it all began. Because Charlie Kirk was fatally shot during a campus event, and the story of how it unfolded is one you need to see through to the very end. Charlie Kirk is fatally shot during campus event. The fatal shooting at Utah Valley University's Fountain Courtyard on September 10th has left a deep scar on a place that many had always considered one of the safest colleges in the country. People often ask themselves, how could something so violent happen in a space meant for learning, for growth, and for community? What was supposed to be an ordinary day, filled with the usual routine of students shuffling to class, laughter echoing across the courtyard, and conversations about homework and weekend plans, suddenly turned into a day of chaos and fear. Officials would later say that this single act of violence changed everything in ways no one could have ever imagined. According to reports, the events began quietly, almost unnoticed. At about 8:29 in the morning, Tyler Robinson, only 22 years old, pulled onto campus in a gray Dodge Challenger. He wore a maroon t-shirt, light shorts, and a black hat with a white logo, blending in like any other young person arriving at school. Surveillance footage, however, showed movements that didn't match the casual look he gave off. Utah Department of Public Safety Commissioner Bo Mason explained that cameras caught Robinson slipping through stairwells and even climbing across the roof, as though he was setting himself up for something much darker. And one could not help but wonder, what was going through his mind in those silent hours as he prepared himself for what he was about to do? Did anyone who passed by feel even the slightest sense that something was off? The campus carried on as usual until noon. At around 12:09 p.m., Charlie Kirk, well known for his political events and currently on his American comeback tour, stood before a crowd of nearly 3,000 people. Students, staff, and members of the community had gathered to hear him speak, many of them no doubt expecting lively discussions and perhaps even heated exchanges, but nothing more than words. Then came 12:23 p.m., a moment that will likely never be forgotten by those who were there. As Kirk answered a question about gun violence, of all topics, a single gunshot cracked through the air. It was one shot, but it was enough to send panic surging through the crowd. The bullet, fired from about 200 yards away, struck him in the neck. Witnesses later said that time seemed to freeze before the chaos erupted. People ducking, screaming, others rushing toward Kirk in desperate attempts to help. How does one even process something so sudden, so cruel, when just seconds earlier it was only another sunny afternoon? The gunman, later confirmed to be Robinson, didn't stay to watch the aftermath. After firing, he leapt from the roof of the Low C Center and vanished into the surrounding neighborhood. While the crowd was still frozen in shock, 6 men rushed to carry Kirk, blood soaking his shirt, toward an SUV. They sped him to Timpanogos Regional Hospital, but by the time doctors worked to save him, it was too late. Kirk was pronounced dead, and the news spread almost instantly. First whispered among frightened students on campus, then across Utah, and soon all over the country. The manhunt for Robinson stretched into the next day, lasting 33 long hours. Authorities released photos asking for the public's help, and it was Robinson's own parents who recognized him. Imagine, for a moment, what it must feel like to see your child's face on the news, linked to a killing that shocked the entire nation. His parents, devastated and afraid, urged him to surrender. At first, Robinson resisted, but with the gentle insistence of a family friend, a youth pastor who also worked as a court security officer, he finally agreed. Late on September 11th, Robinson gave himself up. By then, the rifle he used had already been discovered. Wrapped in a dark towel and hidden in a wooded area not far from campus, the Mauser Model 98 rifle with its scope was matched to Robinson after investigators found his DNA on the trigger. When officials spoke publicly, their words carried both grief and anger. Utah's governor, Spencer Cox, didn't hesitate to call the killing what he believed it was, a political assassination. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed that all evidence pointed to Robinson acting alone, though many still asked if there had been signs missed along the way. Utah Valley University's president, Astrid S. Tumenez, shared her shock and sadness, calling the loss of Kirk not only tragic, but deeply unsettling for a campus that prided itself on safety and inclusion. The university shut down entirely until the following Monday, leaving classrooms empty, events canceled, and hallways silent. It was as though the campus itself needed time to breathe, to mourn, and to begin making sense of what had just unfolded. Amid the sorrow, there were also voices calling for healing. Student body president Kyle Cullimore urged his fellow students not to give in to the divisions that such acts of violence often deepen. He told them to stop putting labels on one another and, instead, to simply see each other as human. His words reminded many that in moments of tragedy, it is easy to fall into anger, suspicion, and blame. But it is far harder and far more important to remember shared humanity. And that is exactly where the story takes a powerful turn. Because those words didn't just stay in the room where they were spoken. They rippled outward, sparking conversations, stirring emotions, and forcing even the most distant observers to pause. In fact, some of the loudest responses came not from ordinary people, but from those whose voices carry weight on a much larger scale. What did the world say when Charlie's death became more than just a personal loss? What did leaders, public figures, and organizations do when they could no longer stay silent? Stay with me, because the reactions that followed reveal more than just sympathy. They uncover a much bigger truth about how society chooses to honor, respond, and sometimes even fail in the face of heartbreak. Public figures and organizations respond to Charlie's death. The assassination of Charlie Kirk set off a wave of shock and grief that seemed to ripple across every corner of the nation, drawing responses from political figures, organizations, and ordinary people who had followed his work over the years. It was not the kind of news that people simply read and moved on from. Instead, it left many pausing to reflect, to ask themselves how such a thing could happen, and to wonder what it would mean for the movements he had shaped and the people he had influenced. In the immediate aftermath, former President Donald Trump was among the first to make his reaction public. He ordered that flags across all Trump properties be lowered to half-mast, a symbolic gesture that underscored the weight of the loss. In his statement, he shared that Kirk would be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously, an honor that spoke to the scale of his influence. Trump described Kirk as a patriot who had loved America with his whole heart. And for many who read those words, it seemed to capture what they themselves had often seen in him, whether they agreed with his views or not. Wasn't it striking, they thought, how quickly tributes can come pouring in when a figure like this is suddenly gone? As news spread, Turning Point USA, the organization Kirk had founded when he was just 18 years old, also released a statement. They announced that a public memorial service would take place on September 21st at Arizona's State Farm Stadium, a venue that could hold over 60,000 people. The choice of such a massive space seemed to say something about the scale of the movement Kirk had built and the expectation that thousands would want to pay their respects. Alongside the memorial, the organization launched a fund in Kirk's name, intended to keep his mission alive and ensure that the work he had started would not end with his passing. Their statement said that his vision would continue through the millions of young Americans he had inspired. For those who had followed his career, the words struck a chord. It made them ask, how many lives can one person really touch in such a short span of time? And could his ideas continue to grow even without his presence? The grief was not limited to official statements. J.D. Vance, the vice presidential candidate, and his wife Usha took part in the somber journey of transporting Kirk's casket from Utah to Arizona. People who watched the procession noted how visibly emotional Vance was, a reminder that behind political titles and campaigns, there were friendships and personal bonds that could not be hidden. He called Kirk a voice for millions of Americans who felt unheard. And in that moment, it seemed clear that the loss was not only political, but deeply human. Erika Kirk vows to continue Charlie's legacy. In the midst of her deep grief, Erika Kirk spoke with a kind of calm strength that left many people both moved and inspired. She did not speak as someone who was broken, though her heart was clearly heavy, but as someone who had chosen to carry forward the work her husband so passionately gave his life to. She said that she would continue everything Charlie had started, and there was no hesitation in her voice when she made that promise. Wasn't it remarkable, people wondered, how even in the middle of such a devastating loss, she could find the courage to stand tall and speak about the future? It was almost as if she had made up her mind that grief, while unavoidable, would not stop her from protecting and extending the mission that Charlie had built with so much dedication. She explained that she planned to continue the American Comeback Tour, the very tour Charlie had been conducting when his life was suddenly cut short. Erika said firmly that the tour would not be abandoned, and her words carried the weight of someone who knew just how important the message behind it really was. Charlie's message, she reminded everyone, was about America's founding principles, about constitutional values, and about the idea that these truths should reach every corner of the nation. And wasn't that a cause worth holding on to, even in the face of danger? Many in the audience seemed to silently ask themselves that same question. She even addressed the concerns about safety and security, admitting that the risks were real, but making it clear that fear could not be allowed to dictate the future. To stop now, she said, would be like surrendering to intimidation, and that was something she refused to do. Perhaps the most touching part of her words came when she turned her attention to their children. She spoke about their young daughter and infant son with a tenderness that revealed just how determined she was to preserve Charlie's memory for them. She said their children would grow up knowing their father's courage, that they would one day understand that he was a man who stood for truth no matter the cost. How powerful is that, to raise children not just with memories of a parent, but with the understanding of the values that parent lived for. Erika even shared that she was creating memory books filled with photos, stories, and testimonies from people whose lives Charlie had touched. In this way, her children would one day flip through pages that told them not only who their father was, but why his life had mattered to so many. It was her way of ensuring that his voice would still be heard, even when he could no longer speak for himself. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.